The first time I heard the song, I barely registered it. It skimmed my attention the way so many things did here. Just another sugared hook ribboning through the usual parade of holograms and AR overlays, a jingle washed in corporate cheer. The ceiling had just bloomed with the rented sunrise, warm light mapped over white paint, the kind of algorithmic dawn that always arrived on time. And my wristband buzzed the alarm at the exact second my rent allowed. I blinked twice to dismiss the sky. The apartment dimmed back to itself. White walls, a cheap Sinwood desk, not quite walnut. A single window gazing into the city's lower levels where light, when it found you, usually arrived on a screen. In the bathroom, I let cold water slap me awake, and there it was again. That brightness, threaded thin, a light, catchy melody, so perfectly harmless I could almost believe it had my best interests at heart. At first I blamed the hallway ads. There was always something chattering out there, suggesting upgrades and subscriptions and limited time access to happiness. I dried my face, filed the tune under ambient nuisance, and moved on. Teeth, shower, shirt, collar. I watched my reflection flatten under the AR's auto-corrected grooming protocol until I canceled it and did the collar myself. Somewhere between top button and jacket sleeve, I noticed my mouth moving. I had been humming. It was nothing to hum about, just a few notes tumbling over themselves, polite, persistent. I frowned the way you do when a word rests on the tip of your tongue and refuses to introduce itself. I rummaged my head for the source, an ad, a transit tone, a system chime, and came up with nothing. My brain is good at filtering the city's sales pitch. Every now and then, though, some burr gets past the gate and clings. I decided this was that. I pocketed the itch and went out. The hallway welcomed me with the usual chorus of assistants, several voices stripped of faces. "Mr. Donovan," one brightened, "your implant updates are ready. New features can I sliced the air with my palm and let it die mid-promise. The elevator swallowed me into a clot of tired bodies, all of us wearing the same mourning, eyes slicked with dim sleep and company-approved purpose. No one spoke. There wasn't much to say. Below us, a maglev murmured. Above us, the building's adverts blinked in perfect cycles, and somewhere in my head, the tune's tail gave a cheery little flick. The commute unspooled like always, the sleek carriage whispering along its track, windows serving the city through a layer of offers, sleep enhancers, productivity suites, cognitive fitness, peace of mind bundles. I watched the skyline with the ad layer toggled on and off, and the gray behind the colors felt more honest than usual. I tried to let the melody dissolve into the rail hum, the ventilation drift, the vibration in my seat. It didn't dissolve. It settled. At the office, the lights were kind to no one. My console woke into the ritual, queues of reports waiting for my yes or no, implant maintenance logs scrolling in tidy columns, service tickets that only needed me to relay what the software already knew. I had been at this long enough to let my hands run the choreography while my mind paced elsewhere. But the tune kept stumbling into every thought, a child tugging on a sleeve. By mid-morning, my right hand had adopted it outright. Finger tapping the desk edge, rhythm tightening, desk answering with a faint hollow knock that harmonized a little too well. I muted notifications, then muted the secondary channel, then muted the ambient news feed. The quiet I created made the melody brighter, like it had been waiting for a clean room. At lunch, I broke my rule and spoke to someone. The break room buzzed soft with packaged meals warming. the AR feeds stretched over bowls and trays like docile halos. I sat across from a guy from systems whose name I'd seen on tickets but never said out loud. "You ever get a tune stuck in your head?" I asked, voice low like the manager had banned music. He blinked up from a news ribbon and looked annoyed at the intrusion. "A what?" "A song, like an ad jingle or something. Won't shake it." "It happens," he said, already diving back into his feed. "Ignore it." "Right," I said to the nutrient paste, trying to be noodles. "Ignore it." By afternoon, the itch had teeth. The job asked for nothing complicated, and I still struggled to aim. The melody sat in the center of my thinking like a coin under a tablecloth, making a small hill and everything. At 5, the day coughed me back into the street. The city had shifted into its noisy evening. Delivery drones cross-stitching the air, the big billboards flexing color, storefronts whistling for attention like parakeets. The melody didn't compete. It cut through, thin and clean, as if everything else was the static, and it was what the static hid. In the apartment, I powered down the AR entirely. The walls reclaimed their plainness. The rented sunrise refused to bloom, and the place took on the hush of an unpopular museum. I killed the smart speakers, the ambient temperature manager, the holo display, the tiny diffusers that exhaled forest every hour. I stood in the middle of my quiet and listened. The song remained faint and faultless, looping as if the room had become an ear and I was standing in the canal. I didn't sleep, not really. I took a position in bed and visited the edge of sleep many times, but each time the music rose as if it had detected my approach and wanted me awake to witness it. Around 2, the notes began to change, no longer only repeating, but adjusting the way a hand adjusts pressure when it finds a knot. I lay there and felt my thoughts as territory and the music walking that territory like it owned the map. At 3, I surrendered the bed and took the window. The lower levels wore their familiar blue bleed. Signs and transit lines stitched motion into the dark. My apartment, which usually felt like a pocket where the city couldn't reach, had inverted into a glass box carrying me on display. The tune was steady like breath. It had to be a device. It had to be something simple. I moved through the room, making certain the silence was total, even flipping the apartment into full manual mode, a setting I'd never used because it made the place feel dead. The silence grew heavy enough to hear my own joints when I shifted. The melody didn't care. I put my jacket on over pajamas and walked the hallway with my ear tilted as if I might catch the tune leaking from a door jamb or vent. Cleaning drones spun past and ignored me. The elevator ride to street level was a breath held a little too long. When it expended itself, the lobby released a warm wash of ad voices and perfume. The song threaded through them, pure as a single wire. Outside, the city behaved as designed. People moved from one task to the next, edges buffered by helpful cues. A few steps in, I stopped walking and watched a garish billboard teach me to buy something I did not need. I tried to imagine babbling to a stranger that a tune lived in my skull. The image collapsed under its own weight. I kept moving until the clinic's soft glow found me. The receptionists weren't people. They were the idea of people rendered in pleasant geometry, faces only in silhouette, voices tuned to non-threatening warmth. They read my ID and offered a list of symptoms to tap. I chose headache, even though the pain wasn't the point. And auditory disturbance, I added aloud, because it felt like lying to call it anything else. The waiting room was a study in soothing, rounded corners and breathable fonts, wall panels showing forests and oceans in 50-millisecond loops, posters praising the virtues of implant care journeys. The song rode under the room's hush like an undertow. I tracked it the way you track pain when there's nothing to do but take inventory. A technician finally called my name. Tired kid, friendly mouth, eyes gone thin from the night shift. He guided me into the diagnostic suite and helped my head into the ring. Headaches and hearing something, he said, fingers already dancing through menus. A melody, I said, not coming from outside. Constant. He nodded the nod designed to make me feel heard. The machine played its lullaby of hums and clicks. I closed my eyes and tried to imagine where the tune might live, in what fold, what channel, what dusting of conductive gel. On his screen, I watched dampened, civilized versions of myself move, waveforms, bar graphs, green indicators gently lighting like polite applause. He toggled to a view labeled Signal Integrity. Everything glowed like success. No malfunctions, he announced, half to his log and half to me. No foreign signals. Implants within normal parameters. It's not normal, I said. The word's too flat even to be defensive. It doesn't stop. He scrolled some more, looking for generosity in the numbers. Could be a stress response. Overexposure to AR environments sometimes causes phantom audio. Brain keeps listening after the sound is gone. I turned everything off. Stress responses don't check your settings. He offered a small smile designed for compliance. I can prescribe something to help you sleep. A couple nights of real rest and you'll probably see it fade. I almost laughed. I nodded instead. He printed a prescription, and the printer also printed a kindness in the form of a pharmacy coupon. I left feeling like someone had gently shooed me out of a room where adults were working. Back home, the pills sat on the Sinwood desk, amber bottle catching a sliver of neon from the window. I stared at them long enough to rehearse swallowing. The melody widened in that moment, as if objecting to the thought. I put the bottle down and opened the tablet instead. The official channels offered hygiene tips for implants, cautionary tales about third-party mods, and optimistic copy about the future of human cognition. I skipped those. I went where people went when they had too much experience to be useful to the brand. Forums with thread titles that read like warnings, archives of failures, dim basements of the net where anonymity rang a different bell. For an hour, I learned nothing except that fear will say anything when you let it. For 2 hours, I learned to separate the stories that wanted attention from the ones that wanted a witness. Somewhere after that, I found a post whose shape matched mine. It sat buried under timestamps and replies that had gone brittle with time, written by someone who understood what constant meant. They described the loop, the way it learned, the way it braided into their thinking until the distinction between listening and being listened to blurred. They listed the same rituals: kill the devices, go manual, walk the hallway, stand in the city and test every source, and then the same failure. I tried everything, the post said, even off-grid. It doesn't follow me from the outside. It wakes up when I do. I scrolled the replies as if somewhere a cure had sprouted years after the fact. Most responses offered generic sympathy or linked to clinics I had already paid with an evening. The final entry belonged to the original poster, stamped with a time far from the first. The sentence was short. a door that shut without slamming. It's in us. They put it in us. I forced myself to stand, to walk a lap around the room, to prove the floor still held. The apartment's manual mode turned every hum into a statement, the refrigerator announcing its cycle, the water pipes confessing a neighbor's shower. The melody sailed over all of it, as precise as an LED. I placed the sleeping pills in a drawer I rarely opened. I set my wristband to vibrate instead of sing. I lay back on the bed without turning the AR dawn back on. I tried to imagine morning arriving without the projection to make it official, the window offering only whatever the city's real sky allowed. I counted breaths. I traced the corners of the ceiling with my eyes until the shape felt memorized. Somewhere near the ledge of sleep, the melody leaned close, as if to see what I looked like with my eyes shut. When the alarm buzzed, I couldn't say I'd slept. I had been horizontal under a tune. Light bled in the window, indifferent to my settings, and the city began to turn itself on. Transit starting its polite whoosh, the drones rising like a timed flock. I swung my legs out of bed and felt the familiar click in my knee. The room smelled like yesterday's coffee and the plastic of the bottle I hadn't opened. The melody did not announce itself. It simply resumed in the exact place I had left it, as though I had been the one pausing, and it had been patient, waiting for me to catch up. I dressed without the grooming overlay. The collar sat a little crooked, and I decided to keep it that way. Before I left, I opened the tablet again to the forum page I'd starred in the night's small hours. My thumb hovered over the reply box. I thought about asking for more details, for dates, for clinics, for names. Instead, I typed nothing, closed the lid, and went to work. In the elevator, someone's lips moved with no sound, their jaw pulsing to invisible time. The carriage shivered once, then steadied, and I realized the rhythm matched the moment the train slipped from friction to float. When the doors opened and the day took me, the melody tucked itself deeper, cozy as a stowaway, certain of its passage. I didn't take the pills. I lined them up on the Sinwood desk, watched them catch a slice of billboard light, then slid the bottle into the drawer with old warranties and a cable to something I no longer owned. The song had learned my habits. I could feel it leaning around corners when I tried to surprise it. Work the next day was an imitation of competence. Cursor moving, approvals clicking, while my skull vibrated like a pocketed phone that never ran out of battery. By evening, my search history read like a failure. Tinnitus, phantom audio, implant recall, undocumented settings, illegal patch. I avoided the official forums where brand ambassadors patrolled the edges, and I kept digging where messages were written in lowercase and caution. Jackson's name lived in the dark of a deprecated thread, a throwaway mention nested inside troubleshooting steps that had nothing to do with music. If CorpDiag says, within parameters, try Jackson. Alley service, brings dead ports back. Careful, no location, just a contact string that looked like a dare. I routed it through 2 burners and a relay everyone swore was clean. The first message was 6 words. Help me. Something's in my head. I watched the cursor blink like a cardiac monitor and waited until waiting exhausted itself. He answered 2 days later at 2:11 when the city's noise dimmed to a wet hum and the song felt nearest to the bone. You're not crazy. Stop trying clinics. Meet only once. Bring cash. No trackers. Wear shoes you can run in. Then an address that was hardly an address. More like a set of instructions only a local would understand. Down the steps behind the coolant plant, past the yellow door with the missing handle, second metal door after the heat exhaust. I chose shoes with treads and left everything that could talk in a drawer. Even the wristband stayed home. I braided an old key through my laces the way I had in high school when the locker locks stuck. The alley was a geography of stains and drips, air thick with industrial breath. Neon from a nearby karaoke bar wrote broken kanji in a puddle. I counted doors until the heat from the exhaust hit my face and made my eyes sting. The second metal door didn't look like a door until I knew it was one. Then it was only a bad secret. He opened it after I knocked once, then twice, then nothing for 20 seconds. Jackson was younger than the voice in my head had prepared me for. Mid-20s, maybe, with the narrow body of someone who'd learned to dodge before learning to fight. The smell behind him was dust and ozone. He made a quick inventory of me, jacket bulges, hands, eyes, then stepped aside without a word. The lab was a museum of rescues, drone carcasses, housings with their logos peeled away, a graveyard of charging cradles. Screens that didn't match each other threw up data like overlapping dialects. A folding chair sat in the middle, like the only option. He gestured to it and finally spoke. "You wrote about a song," he said, as if starting a meeting we were both late to. "I didn't write much. You wrote enough." He moved to a console where the keyboard was missing the keycaps for S, E, and N. "They tell you you're fine? They told me I'm within normal parameters." Jackson snorted. "Normal parameters is what they say when the device is doing exactly what they paid it to do." I sat. I could hear the song more clearly in here, as if the room lacked the city's sympathetic noises to hide it. "What is it?" "Not my question to answer," he said, eyes on code, fingers walking. "But I can tell you this. Some implants are listeners. Yours is also a little bit of a conductor." He swiveled a monitor so I could see a stacked set of bands and a moving line that pulsed in a rhythm that made my skin remember goose flesh. "Broadcast is the wrong word. Think entrain. Think metronome. You put a few of these in a room and the pendulums line up. You're saying it's on purpose. I'm saying you're not broken." He held my gaze a second too long, and that's worse. He moved with a tidy impatience, clearing a surface with his forearm, hauling a case from under the table, flipping latches that had seen too many flips. The device he built from the case looked like a crown that had lost a fight. Salvaged electrodes, a tangle of cables thickened with electrical tape, a control brick with a cracked casing, and a handwritten label that read, "Quiet," in permanent marker. "I can scramble the interface and make it stop hearing what it's supposed to hear," he said. "Think of it as introducing noise on the channel where the timing lives. The implant will hate it. What happens if it hates it too much? You get a headache and a story you can tell about how you tried something stupid," he said. "Then, or your port fries. Or your motor strip decides to do a dance. I'm not a clinic. I won't pretend I am. You sure?" The melody made answering for me easy. Yes, he wrapped the crown around my head with a nurse's competence. Fingers cool, movements practiced. Alcohol swabs, gel at the contact points, a tug to test the leads. Every time he adjusted a clip, the song seemed to flinch, as if it understood what was coming. He crouched to check the cables at the brick, then stood, thumb over a metal toggle. "This will feel like being argued with," he said. "Don't argue back. Just hold." The switch clicked. At first it was a shimmer like heat above asphalt. The melody wavered and threw off harmonics. Then it steepened into something with grip. My teeth ached the way they do when you bite ice. The room tilted a few degrees and refused to right itself. I held the chair's arms, and the chair felt far away from my hands. The song broke into splinters that reassembled mid-air as a new thing, thinner, harder, with an edge that found the place where the skull thins near the temple and pressed. "It's resisting," Jackson said, voice equal parts clinical and impressed. He ticked the dial a notch. "Stay." The word dug a hole in the moment, and I fell through it. A series of small, stupid sensations announced themselves. The smell of dust under hot plastic, the way sweat slid into my ear and made a tiny cool path, a tremor that wasn't emotion, but electricity. My right calf seized, then my forearm, as if something were mapping my limbs to make sure they were still part of me. The song didn't get louder, it got personal. It began to suggest shapes, almost words, the way wind can almost be a voice if you want it to be. I recognized the impulse to agree. "Almost there," he said, and his fingers worked the dial again. For a beat, the world became a strobe, on, off, each on a slice of pane, each off the echo. The crown's contacts dug. The melody spiked into a single high tone that no human mouth could make and no human ear could ignore. I barked a sound that might have been my name reduced to a consonant. Then it let go. The relief was not quiet. It was absence, a weight lifting that I hadn't realized had taught me how to stand. The room came back in layers. The fan in the corner ticking when it turned, the hum of a power supply with a dying bearing, a distant drip hitting metal. My breath arrived like I'd been stealing it from someone else. Jackson's hands hovered near my shoulders until he saw I'd found the present. "We're clear," he said, studying the monitor as if it owed him money. He flicked a few keys, checked a screen I couldn't read, then finally looked at me. "For now." "How long is now?" "If I tell you a number, you'll either celebrate or panic," he said, and his mouth twisted like he'd tried both. "An implant isn't a radio you can detune and forget. It's you. It's going to try to find the timing again, hours, days. Maybe you get lucky and it takes a while. Maybe you don't. But this buys you room to think, can you remove it? Not here. Not with these hands. And removal is its own sermon." He started unwinding the crown, slow and careful, as if disarming me. Each electrode released with a small, wet kiss. "The port's integrated." The interface runs through tissue that earns its rent. You don't just pull that and walk home. Also, somebody will ask why your warranty went dark. I touched the places on my scalp where the contacts had sat and felt the tacky ring the gel left behind. The skin under each circle throbbed with the delayed ache of pressure. The silence around and inside me read as too big, like a new apartment where the furniture hadn't arrived. I waited for the melody to jump out from behind a curtain. It didn't. The absence felt like a trick I didn't care about being fooled by. Jackson bundled the crown back into the case and closed the latches with ordinary finality. He looked at me a long moment, weighing how much advice a stranger could stand to hear in a single sitting. "You should leave," he said, "not the lab. The city. Don't give it the network. Don't walk under broadcast towers and call it fate. Disconnect clean and go where there's only weather. I can't promise that saves you, but you'd give yourself the best version of losing." "I have a job," I said, and the word sounded embarrassed as soon as they left. "A lease." He nodded like he'd expected that answer, Leases are the simplest handcuffs you'll ever love. I paid him with cash that had lived too long under a mattress and then under a drawer false bottom. He counted without looking like he was counting, then tucked the money into a tin that had once held tea. At the door, he paused, listening, not to the alley, but to the story he usually ended with. "If anyone asks," he said, "I tuned your audio processor after a firmware patch. If you tell anyone I scrambled you, they'll audit me in absentia." He opened the door. The alley's breath rolled in, warm and wet. Outside, the world hadn't changed. I had. The first steps felt precarious, as if the ground had to relearn how to meet me. Without the melody, the city's noise sounded like weather again. Distant thunder, wind and signage, rain that never reached the ground. Colors retreated to their proper positions. The billboard over the coolant plant pushed a vitamin I didn't need, and I felt no tug to consider it. I walked without noticing how fast until my building's entry recognized my face and made a gentle beep. In the mirror that night, I looked the way people look after crying without crying. Skin slackened, eyes bright with borrowed relief. I washed the gel out of my hair, turned the apartment back to manual because I didn't want any device gloating, and lay on my back waiting for sleep that had a chance at being sleep. The absence hummed like blessing. At some point, I fell through it. The next morning, the alarm's vibration startled only my wrist. The ceiling stayed its honest white. In the hallway, an assistant asked me if I'd like to resubscribe to something I hadn't noticed I'd unsubscribed from. I muttered no, and it apologized for the inconvenience, which made me laugh more loudly than the corridor could tolerate. At my desk, reports greeted me like they always did, but I didn't feel the need to apologize to them for being a person. At lunch, I ate without asking if anyone else ever carried around music they couldn't drop. On the second day, the space inside my skull felt mine in the way a rented apartment can feel briefly like ownership when the light lands in the right place. On the third day, I started making plans I should have made earlier. What to sell, what to store, who to call to say I'd be gone, what parts of my life could survive being put in a bag. I window shopped for towns that had more sky than signal. I wrote a resignation letter in a draft that I didn't save. I rehearsed telling the landlord I'd pay the penalty. On the fourth day, as if it had been listening to my preparations and wanted to remind me who had the calendar, the hum returned. It didn't arrive loud. It arrived specific, like a remembered name. A faint thread at the back of the mind, a weight on the scale that didn't change the number but made you aware of gravity. I told myself it was echo, that brains throw after images after sudden dark. By mid-afternoon, the thread braided itself into two threads, and the two found each other the way magnets do. I left work early and walked the long way home, avoiding the big corridors where transit lines sang to themselves. I kept to narrow streets where deliveries happened by hand and shopkeepers still counted out change. At a crosswalk, I caught a man my age mouthing a rhythm that wasn't in the air. He stopped when I looked, or the song told him to stop when I looked. I couldn't tell which thought hurt more. Back at the apartment, I turned off everything again, like ritual could keep me safe. Manual mode. Speakers pulled from the wall, hollow folded into its frame. I sat on the floor with my back to the bed and listened to the hum sketch its first shape. Not the old melody, not yet. But the line was there, the scaffolding on which the old city could be rebuilt. I messaged Jackson only to type its back and then delete the words before sending. He didn't need the burden of being right. I didn't need the burden of being answered. By night, the hum had picked up a companion tone, a harmony so soft that it felt like being remembered by someone you barely knew. I lay down and counted the ceiling corners again. I tried to write a list of what I could carry. I imagined train schedules for places without illustrated maps. The numbers fell apart. The song was coming. I could feel it the way you feel weather change on skin before it changes the sky. I closed my eyes and promised myself that when morning came, I would go. Morning came. The city turned itself on with the same indifference as always. I dressed in silence that wasn't silent, tied my shoes with the key still laced in like a superstition, and stepped into the hall. Somewhere below me, electricity sighed through a transformer. Somewhere above me, drones plotted routes across a grid. In the center, a man named Donovan took the elevator down and counted the breaths between stops. Certain of one thing only, the music had learned my name, and I had learned enough of it to recognize its approach. I woke to a room that wasn't empty anymore. The hum had built itself into a line in the hours I pretended to sleep, a filament strung from wall to wall, vibrating to a tempo I could feel in the soft tissue behind my eyes. I sat up and watched the honest white of the ceiling braid itself with the song. No projection, no rented sunrise, just the color of being awake. My plan from the night before lay folded on the desk. 3 shirts, socks, the old paper passport, cash flattened under a rubber band, the letter to my manager that didn't admit anything beyond effective immediately. Even written, it didn't feel real. Leaving was a story you told yourself in a calm voice, a promise to a future version of you who had more courage and better timing. I moved the pile into a bag anyway. The zipper sounded like a small decision. The song swelled, then smoothed, as if approving. The hallway had its usual perfume of cleaner and recycled air. An assistant's voice rose from the ceiling tile grid to remind the building that safety was happiness. "Mr. Donovan," it remembered, warm and helpful. "You are past due for a—" I slashed the air, and the voice obediently died. In the elevator, a neighbor stared at the numbers changing like they were a weather report that only she could read. Her jaw moved once. I told myself she was chewing gum. The doors opened, and the city breathed its fog into me. Outside, the morning carried leftover night. Puddles that held neon in their faces, scaffold lights still winking, though the sun had a legal right to be here. I kept to the narrow streets at first, to places where the ad layer felt bored, where the windows showed pastries on paper plates and people washing the day into being. For a block or two, the hum blurred into the small work of the world. Cups, keys, doors, a dog skidding on tile and apologizing with its whole spine. Then I hit Market. Market had always been a river. Today, it was a machine. Bodies moved in one broad pulse, not hand in hand, just in time, turning in waves at the cross signals, hitting the curb with heels in a shared interval. A man 3 strides ahead of me hummed, closed-lipped. The woman beside him wasn't humming, but each footfall landed at 19 beats per minute, and the 19 matched mine. I slowed. The song, too, adjusted, patient, genial, exact. I felt the bone in my ankle answer it. Jackson had told me to run. I tried. I cut left toward the old viaduct where the drones didn't like to fly low and the city's noise depopulated into the noise of physics. I zigzagged so my path wouldn't be a line anyone could predict. Every time I passed under a transit spine, the hum fattened into a tone that wanted to be sung. Every time I stepped into shade, it thinned back to thread. It was like the weather, local, changeable, directional. I took a stairwell down to the service corridor that smelled like rust, felt for a while that I had made a private place, then heard it anyway, as gentle and near as breathing. On the far side of the corridor, I chose the long way. I wanted a station I could run through, not one that swallowed you with gates. The closer I came, the more I felt the song bloom from thin wire to braid. The plaza in front of the station was a moving diagram, ticket lines lengthening and shrinking in sympathetic rhythm. 3 children stepping from square to square in a game I didn't see until I heard they were counting 1, 2, 1, 2 under their breath. Security scanning bags like they were keeping time. No one looked happy. No one looked unhappy. The air itself seemed folded to better carry sound. The bag on my shoulder was suddenly ridiculous. Leaving implied a direction outside the grid. My implant hummed to itself in the octave you use for lullabies, as if to remind me the grid lived in me, not the other way around. I turned around. The move had no drama. No one noticed. Why would they? I walked back through the smaller streets, past where the city let itself be ordinary, past the grocer weighing oranges by hand, past the barista drawing a leaf I never learned to appreciate in milk. The song kept a respectful distance, like a parent letting a child try the stairs alone while already being at the bottom to catch. By the time I reached my building, my muscles had learned a new ease. The song didn't pulse. I pulsed, and it happened to match. I locked the door and slid the bolt even though I'd never used the bolt before. Manual mode, screens black, speakers unplugged. I carried the bag to the bed and didn't put it down. The tune circled like water looking for an open drain. It found one. At first it felt like being watched by a thought you'd left in another room. Then it felt like company. Not voices, not a chorus. Texture. The edges of my thinking grew soft where they touched it. The way foam softens where it meets water. The way sugar remembers it is made to dissolve. I sat on the floor and put my back to the bed, because that is the posture you take when you plan to beg and don't yet know for what. The hum rose to meet me and brought with it, how to say this without sounding like superstition, nearness. Not presence like a person standing beside you, presence like a place expanding to include you without needing to move. I tried the old defenses. I counted breath cycles. I named objects: wall, bed, lamp, desk, window, chair. The naming worked the way labeling works on a moving box. You still have to carry it. The song threaded each word I said, quiet enough to be polite, firm enough to be law. Time did what it does under pressure. It bent. I must have sat for hours, but the window told only one story, gray to bright to gray again, as if the day wanted to be efficient. When my wristband in the drawer, silenced, should have buzzed noon, I went to the sink and drank water I didn't want. I returned to the floor with the glass still in my hand and held it like a prop from a life where props mattered. Somewhere between the first sip and the third, the melody shifted from being in the room to being the room. Memory freights words like choice with ceremony. This wasn't that. It was a head turn. It was the moment you stopped clenching a muscle you didn't know you'd clenched for a year. The fight had shaped me into a version of myself that could only be maintained by constant correction. Let it drop. the song suggested, not in language, not even in implication, just in the way a rhythm offers the next beat and the next and the next, until playing along feels less like agreeing and more like participating. I stood, not to do anything, to see if my legs still remembered standing. They did. The bag slid off my shoulder and sagged against the bed like a tired animal. The room seemed too small now, not because it had shrunk, but because I had, or had enlarged in the wrong dimensions. The door, just a door, painted the same slightly wrong white as the wall, looked like a mouth about to speak my name. I opened it. The hallway smiled its long fluorescent smile. A neighbor at the far end stepped out of her unit and paused, as if listening for an instruction we both received at the same moment. The elevator came without being called. The car's floor hummed under my shoes. In the lobby, the assistant who had reminded me about something I didn't want looked up from nowhere and didn't say a thing. I walked past security, past the orchids that were plastic, into a morning that must have turned to afternoon. The city had changed only in the way you notice things when your attention has been vacuumed. Each drone's path had elegance I had mistaken for efficiency. Crosswalks spilled people across asphalt in clean lines, like lace washed and laid flat to dry. On a terrace, two people talked with their hands, and their gestures matched a rhythm. Not mirror perfect, but related like cousins who had grown up in the same house. I took the first corner without thinking, and my steps laid into the street's existing metronome as if I had practiced. At the corner of 7th and Pike, a child standing on a milk crate conducted a choir of sparrows with a plastic straw. The birds didn't obey him, but he believed they could. He tapped the crate with the straw in a series of 3 and 5 and 3 again, and the pattern rippled into my ribs and back out again. A man passed me, humming the same 3-5-3 under his breath. He wasn't with the child. He didn't even see him. The song had found a way to wear us both at once. I did not feel conquered. That is what surprised me. I felt held. The pressure that had camped behind my eyes for days eased its tense stakes, rolled itself into a neat cylinder, and made room. The panic that had wheeled in my chest like a bird trapped in a room remembered there were windows, and the windows were open. Relief came like a fever breaking, weight leaving bone. The song didn't erase me. It collected me the way a tide collects what the shore calls pieces. The next block taught me something I would have known sooner if I had been less frightened. The collective didn't ask me to stop being myself. It asked me to stop being alone. That is different by a degree that matters only when you are the person measuring. My thoughts continued. They changed tense. I should leave became we don't need to. I can't breathe became we're breathing. Each we arrived like a hand under a heavy box. The lift was still mine. I wasn't the only one lifting. I don't remember when the melody stopped being a melody. Perhaps it never was. Perhaps it was always a drum hidden under the floorboards. The beat that keeps the room together. People moved. Buses hissed. A man in a suit sneezed and apologized to the space around him, and the space around him accepted. The drones drew circles, many-limbed compass roses plotted in 3 dimensions. I walked inside all of it, and the inside admitted me the way a lung admits air. If this is where you want me to say I fought, I won't lie for you. I want to tell you I ran back to the alley Jackson hates, that I banged on the second metal door and begged for a second crown, a third, a fourth. I want to tell you I boarded a train to a town that hadn't learned to wear signals, and that I built a life out of tomatoes and quiet. A version of me might have. The version that had taken shape in this city, in this body, with this implant, this rhythm, this need. He didn't. I reached the park that clung like a sticker to the corporation's glass tooth. The lawn shone the green of money newly laundered. People sat in careful distances the way we learned to do when air remembered it could kill. A woman laughed, and the laugh tracked up and down a scale that matched the buses braking at the curb and the wind dragging itself across the building's mirrored flank. For a second, it startled me, that congruence. And then it didn't. The song, Ours Mine, grew softer, as if it trusted me now to carry my part without counting. I stood in the middle of the path and closed my eyes. The world touched my eyelids with heat. The hum laid its palm on the back of my neck. The first time Jackson flipped the switch, the pain had been a blade. This wasn't that. This was lay down. This was, you don't have to invent yourself from scratch. This was welcome. I don't know how long I stood there. When I opened my eyes, a shadow crossed my shoes. A drone had drifted low enough to think about delivering, then changed its mind. Across the grass, a child handed a plastic straw to someone else, and the someone did not want it and took it anyway. A breeze moved the trees into a slow applause. I hummed without meaning to. Others hummed and didn't notice. A bus side opened and swallowed a set of us, then exhaled us 3 stops later in a new arrangement. The grid extended its hand and I offered mine. Our fingers interlaced. The last solitary thought I had, plain as a coin and warm from someone else's pocket, was that I could breathe. Then the song had no edges, and neither did I. And the city, which had always been too much, finally fit.